I've spent my entire life decoding the mathematics of the cosmos, but nothing could have prepared me for what 3i Atlas just did. Before we begin, I need you to do something for me. Comment your city name below and tell me, have you noticed anything unusual in the night sky recently? NASA isn't asking this lightly. What I'm about to share may change the way you see humanity's place in the universe. 3 days ago, at 347 UTC, every major observatory on Earth recorded the same impossible event. The interstellar object we've been calling 3i Atlas, a visitor from beyond our solar system, beyond our sun's gravitational embrace, spontaneously collapsed its external shell. Not gradually, not through natural degradation, but in a synchronized, geometrically perfect sequence that defies every law of astrophysics we hold sacred. I'm Michio Kaku, and for the first time in my career, I'm speaking to you not as a physicist explaining the universe, but as a human being terrified by what we've discovered. Let me take you back to where this began, because understanding what just happened requires understanding what 3i Atlas actually was, or what we thought it was. Amateur astronomer Gennady Borisov discovered an object moving through our solar system at a velocity that immediately told us something profound. This wasn't ours. It came from the space between stars, from the dark ocean that separates island civilizations, scattered across the galactic disk. We cataloged it, we measured it, we watched it pass through our cosmic neighborhood like a stranger on a highway, never stopping, never slowing. But 3i Atlas was different from its predecessor, 1i Oumuamua, where Oumuamua was elongated, cigar-shaped, tumbling through space in ways that sparked endless debate about its true nature. 3i Atlas appeared almost mundane, a comet, a dirty snowball from another star system. Its spectroscopic signature showed water ice, carbon compounds, the basic building blocks we'd expect from any ordinary chunk of interstellar debris. We were relieved, actually. After the controversy surrounding Oumuamua, after Harvard's Avi Loeb suggested it might be an artificial light sail, after the measurements showed anomalous acceleration that couldn't be fully explained by outgassing, the scientific community desperately wanted 3i Atlas to be normal, to be natural, to let us sleep at night. How naive we were. The first anomaly appeared 6 months ago when 3i Atlas was approximately 2.3 astronomical units from Earth, heading back toward interstellar space after its brief encounter with our sun. A graduate student at MIT noticed something in the infrared data that shouldn't have been there, a pattern, not a random fluctuation in heat signature, but a pattern, repeating every 1.618 seconds. The golden ratio, phi, the divine proportion that appears in nautilus shells, in the spiral of galaxies, in the architecture of life itself, and now apparently in the thermal emissions of an object we'd classified as a natural comet. I remember the teleconference when we first discussed this. 37 of the world's leading astrophysicists, cosmologists, and astrobiologists all crowded into a secure video call that NASA had classified above top secret. The mood was electric with denial. We invented a dozen explanations: rotational resonance, crystalline structure in the ice reflecting solar radiation, equipment malfunction, confirmation bias. But deep down, in that quiet place where scientists refused to let wishful thinking drown out data, we knew, we all knew, something was inside 3i Atlas. Something was operating inside it. The second anomaly came 3 months later, and this one we couldn't explain away. Every radio telescope that pointed at 3i Atlas, Arecibo before its tragic collapse, the Very Large Array in New Mexico, FAST in China, Meerkat in South Africa, detected a signal, not from Earth, not from our sun, but from the object itself. It wasn't a message, not in any way we understand communication. It was a carrier wave, a pure sine wave at 1.42 gigahertz. The hydrogen line, the universal frequency that any technological civilization would monitor, the cosmic hello channel that SETI has been listening to for decades. But here's what made it impossible. The signal wasn't broadcasting outward, it was broadcasting inward toward the core of 3i Atlas itself. Imagine that. An interstellar object traveling for potentially millions of years through the frozen void between stars, and something inside it is still communicating with itself, still active. The implications crash through our understanding of what's possible like a meteor through atmosphere. How long had it been traveling? Where did it come from? And perhaps most disturbing of all, was it sent or was it running? I want you to understand the physics of what we were dealing with. Interstellar space is not empty. It's filled with trace hydrogen, cosmic rays, micrometeoroids traveling at relativistic speeds. Over the time frames required for interstellar travel, even at high velocity, any unprotected object would be sandblasted, eroded, destroyed. For 3I Atlas to maintain any kind of technological integrity across the light years, its exterior would need to be designed as a shield, a shell, a protective cocoon. We started calling it the ablation barrier. The working theory was that whatever intelligence had launched 3I Atlas had encased it in a sacrificial outer layer, likely a mixture of ice, rock, and possibly metallic compounds, that would absorb the brutal punishment of the interstellar medium while protecting the precious cargo inside. Think of it like a spacecraft enclosed in a comet. Stealth and protection in one elegant solution. If you wanted to cross between star systems without drawing attention, without broadcasting your presence to every civilization monitoring the electromagnetic spectrum, you would do exactly this. You would make yourself look like nature. I began losing sleep around this time, not from excitement, from dread, because if 3I Atlas was camouflaged, if it was designed to appear natural, then we had to confront an uncomfortable question. How many others have we missed? How many times has our solar system been visited by objects we dismissed as ordinary comets or asteroids, never looking closely enough to see the truth? The data from the space telescopes told a story that became clearer with each observation. The Hubble, the James Webb, even the private telescopes that billionaires have launched in recent years, all of them focused on 3I Atlas as it retreated from our sun. And what we saw was an object that was far too symmetrical for nature. Its rotation was too stable. Its trajectory showed micro-corrections, tiny adjustments measured in meters per second, that outgassing couldn't explain. Then came the message from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory that changed everything. Their deep space network had been tracking 3I Atlas continuously, and they'd noticed something extraordinary in its deceleration profile. It was slowing down, not because of gravitational interaction. There was nothing in its path to cause that. It was applying thrust, actively braking. And the calculations showed that at its current rate of deceleration, 3I Atlas would come to a complete stop relative to the cosmic microwave background in approximately 73 years. 73 years, right at the edge of the Oort cloud, the shell of icy bodies that marks the gravitational boundary of our solar system. It was stopping. Whatever 3I Atlas carried, wherever it came from, it wasn't passing through. It was parking. I had a conversation during this period with a colleague I deeply respect, a woman who had devoted her career to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. We met in her office at Berkeley, surrounded by decades of SETI data, printouts of radio signals we'd received from space that all turned out to be pulsars, quasars, Earth-based interference, a career of near misses and false hopes. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Michio, what if we're the zoo? What if all this time we've been looking for them with radio telescopes, and they've been here all along, just watching?" The galactic quarantine hypothesis. The idea that Earth is deliberately isolated, that advanced civilizations have decided we're not ready for contact, that they observe us from a distance, like anthropologists studying an uncontacted tribe. I'd always considered it interesting, but speculative, unprovable. But if 3I Atlas was a probe, if it had crossed light years of space to position itself at our doorstep, then maybe we weren't alone. Maybe we'd never been alone. Maybe we were just finally becoming interesting enough to warrant closer observation. Or maybe we were becoming dangerous enough to require intervention. Let me tell you about the dreams I started having. I'm a physicist. I believe in quantum mechanics, in general relativity, in the mathematical structure of reality. I don't give credence to premonition or supernatural intuition. But for 3 weeks before the shell collapse, I had the same dream every night. I was standing on a beach at night watching the ocean. The stars were wrong, constellations I didn't recognize, as if I were on another world. And from the water, something was rising. Not emerging gradually, but unfolding. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at, angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. a structure that was simultaneously enormous and microscopic, distant and immediate, and a voice, not heard but felt, saying, "The chrysalis is opening." I would wake up with the equation for entropy scrawled on the notepad beside my bed, written in my own handwriting, with no memory of writing it. Then 3 days ago, it happened. The Hubble was conducting a routine observation pass. 3I Atlas was approximately 4.7 astronomical units from Earth, well beyond Mars' orbit, continuing its slow coast toward the outer solar system. The exposure time was set for 30 seconds to capture enough light from the faint object. 15 seconds into the exposure, 3I Atlas began to separate, not explode, not fragment chaotically like a comet breaking apart from tidal stress. It opened. Frame by frame, you could see the external shell dividing along seams that had been invisible until that moment. Geometric sections, 12 of them, arranged in a dodecahedral pattern, peeling away from the core like a mechanical flower blooming. The separation was mathematically perfect. Each section moved away from the center at precisely the same velocity, creating an expanding sphere of debris that was far too organized to be natural. The material didn't tumble or spin. It maintained orientation, as if each piece was individually controlled. And beneath the shell, we saw what had been hidden. The images are still classified, locked in servers that require 3 forms of biometric authentication to access. But I've seen them, I've studied them until they've burned into my retinas, until I see them when I close my eyes. 3. Atlas wasn't a comet, it wasn't even a single object, it was a swarm. Thousands, possibly tens of thousands of smaller structures, each roughly the size of a shipping container, arranged in a loose spherical formation around a central hub. They were dark, almost black, reflecting so little light that even the Hubble struggled to resolve individual units. But their motion was unmistakable. They were repositioning, reconfiguring, forming new geometric patterns like a murmuration of starlings, or like a fleet assuming formation. The electromagnetic spectrum went insane. Every frequency from radio waves to gamma rays showed activity. The swarm was communicating, and it was doing so with a bandwidth that suggested computational power far beyond anything humans have achieved. We're talking exaflops, quintillions of calculations per second, maybe more. The kind of processing capacity you would need for artificial intelligence, for consciousness, for decision-making. NASA convened an emergency meeting. Not a teleconference this time. They flew people to Goddard Space Flight Center, collected our phones at the door, led us into a room that had been swept for listening devices. The mood was no longer academic debate. It was crisis management. The Director of Planetary Defense, yes, that's a real position, and yes, the irony wasn't lost on any of us, stood at the front of the room and said something I'll never forget. We are now operating under the assumption that 3I Atlas is an artificial intelligence system of extraterrestrial origin, and that it has just activated. Activated. That word hung in the air like a blade. Because here's what we realized. The shell hadn't collapsed due to structural failure or completion of its mission. The shell had been jettisoned, like a spacecraft discarding its launch fairings, like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. The protective camouflage was no longer necessary because the journey was over. 3I Atlas had arrived at its destination, and we were the destination. The questions came faster than we could formulate answers. Was it a probe sent to study us? A von Neumann machine capable of self-replication, perhaps here to harvest resources? A relativistic kill vehicle designed to sterilize star systems that showed signs of technological development? Or something we couldn't even conceptualize, built by minds so far beyond human intelligence that trying to understand their motives was like bacteria trying to understand Mozart? I found myself thinking about the Drake equation, that famous formula we use to estimate the number of communicative civilizations in our galaxy. We plug in variables: the rate of star formation, the fraction of stars with planets, the fraction of planets that could support life, the fraction where life actually develops, where intelligence evolves, where technology arises, and finally, the length of time such civilizations release detectable signals. That last variable has always been the most troubling, because we've been broadcasting our presence, radio, television, radar, for only about a century. And we've already come close to destroying ourselves multiple times. Nuclear weapons, climate change, engineered pandemics, artificial intelligence we may not be able to control. What if the reason we haven't detected other civilizations isn't because they're rare? What if it's because the period between developing detectable technology and either destroying yourself or being destroyed is very, very short? What if 3I Atlas is part of that equation? The answer to the Fermi paradox we never wanted to find? On the second day after the shell collapse, something even more disturbing happened. The swarm began to disperse, not randomly, with purpose. The individual units were accelerating, spreading out through the inner solar system in a pattern that computational analysis suggested was optimized for observation, for coverage, for surveillance. They were taking up positions, establishing a network. I want to tell you about the mathematics of what we observed, because it's the mathematics that truly frightens me. The trajectories these units were following showed acceleration profiles that violated our understanding of propulsion. No visible exhaust, no chemical rockets, no ion drives, no nuclear pulse propulsion. They simply accelerated, reaching velocities that suggested reactionless drives or manipulation of space-time itself. If you can control gravity, if you can create localized distortions in the fabric of space-time, then you can travel between stars without carrying propellant. You can reach relativistic speeds without experiencing time dilation. You can cross the galaxy while barely aging at all. The technology gap between humanity and whoever built 3I Atlas isn't like the gap between us and the ancient Romans. It's like the gap between us and ants, maybe larger. That night, I stood in my backyard and looked up at the stars. Somewhere up there, invisible to my eyes but captured in telescope images, thousands of artificial objects were spreading through our solar system. Objects that had crossed the interstellar void, that had masqueraded as a natural comet for months, that had now revealed themselves with a precision that suggested they wanted us to know. And I realized something that made my blood freeze. They weren't hiding anymore because they didn't need to hide. Whatever window of opportunity we might have had to respond, to prepare, to defend ourselves, it had closed the moment that shell opened. We were already surrounded. The government response has been predictably chaotic. Some officials want to attempt communication, to broadcast messages of peace and cooperation. Others advocate for defensive measures. Laughable, really, when you're facing technology centuries or millennia ahead of your own. A few voices, quieter but perhaps wiser, suggest we simply observe and wait. Don't provoke. Don't assume hostility, but don't assume benevolence either. I think about the history of first contact on Earth. When technologically advanced civilizations encountered less developed ones, the results were almost never positive for the latter. Not because of malice necessarily, but because of indifference, because of incompatible values, because the very presence of a superior force disrupts and ultimately destroys the existing order. What happens to humanity's religions when we confirm we're not alone? What happens to our political systems, our economies, our sense of identity and purpose? What happens to a species that discovers it's not the pinnacle of cosmic evolution, but perhaps a very early and primitive stage? The signal intelligence teams have been working around the clock, analyzing every electromagnetic whisper from the dispersed swarm. They've detected communication between the units, not radio waves, but something else. Possibly quantum entanglement, instant communication regardless of distance. The kind of technology that would make our internet look like smoke signals. But here's what keeps me awake now. 3 times in the past 72 hours, units of the swarm have briefly pointed directional transmitters toward Earth. High-frequency, tightly focused beams, each lasting only microseconds, each directed at different locations on our planet's surface. They're not scanning us. They already know everything there is to know about us from passive observation. They're marking us, designating, cataloging. I keep thinking about cattle and ear tags. Yesterday, one of my graduate students, brilliant young woman, specializing in exoplanet detection, came to my office. She'd been crying. She said, "Professor Kaku, I've spent my whole life dreaming about finding evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, and now that we have it, all I feel is terror." Does that make me a coward? I told her what I believe to be true. Fear in the face of the unknown isn't cowardice. It's wisdom. Our ancestors who heard rustling in the grass and felt fear survived. The ones who felt only curiosity got eaten. Evolution gifted us with the capacity for dread because dread keeps us alive. But then she asked me something I couldn't answer. What do we do now? What do we do when we discover we're not alone? And the discovery comes not through a faint radio signal we can choose to answer or ignore, but through a physical presence in our solar system. When the extraterrestrial intelligence isn't safely distant, but here, I don't have an answer. I don't think anyone does. The swarm units have now taken up stable positions throughout the inner solar system. They're not approaching Earth, not yet, but they're not leaving either. They're watching, waiting. One unit is positioned in Mars orbit. Several are near the asteroid belt. 2 are heading toward Venus. The rest are distributed in a 3-dimensional grid that would provide overlapping coverage of Earth's orbital path. Whatever they're planning, they're being methodical, thorough, patient. I find myself wondering about the civilization that built them. Are they still alive, or did 3i Atlas outlive its creators, continuing its mission long after those who launched it turned to dust? Is this a gift or a threat? An observation mission or an evaluation? Are we being studied to determine if we're ready for contact, or to determine if we're a threat that needs to be neutralized? The young scientist in me, the part that fell in love with physics because it revealed the hidden order of the cosmos, wants to see this as humanity's greatest opportunity, first contact, the chance to learn from minds that may have solved the problems we're struggling with, clean energy, interstellar travel, perhaps even the nature of consciousness itself. But the human being in me, the primate brain that evolved to fear predators and protect the tribe, sees something else. I see the potential end of everything we've built, everything we are. Not through malice, but through the simple fact that when 2 civilizations meet and one is vastly more powerful than the other, it's never the powerful one that adapts. There's a concept in astrobiology called the Great Filter. It's the idea that somewhere between the emergence of life and becoming a galaxy-spanning civilization, there's a barrier, a filter that most species don't pass through. Maybe it's nuclear war. Maybe it's artificial intelligence run amok. Maybe it's climate catastrophe. Or maybe it's this. Maybe the filter isn't something civilizations do to themselves. Maybe it's something that's done to them when they reach a certain threshold of technological development and become visible to others who are watching. Maybe every civilization that survives to broadcast its presence gets a visit from something like 3i Atlas. And maybe what happens next determines whether that civilization gets to join whatever galactic community exists out there, or whether it gets filed away as another failed experiment. I think about the cosmic microwave background, that faint echo of the Big Bang that fills the universe. We've mapped it in exquisite detail, looking for tiny fluctuations that tell us about the first moments after creation. But we've also looked for anomalies, for patterns that might suggest artificial origin, messages written in the very structure of space-time by civilizations so advanced they could manipulate the early universe. We've never found anything conclusive. But what if we weren't looking in the right way? What if the messages are there, written in mathematics we haven't discovered yet, in dimensions we can't perceive? What if the universe itself is trying to tell us something and we've been too primitive to understand? I had a realization last night that I haven't shared with anyone yet. The shell collapse, the geometric precision of it, the dodecahedral structure, it's meaningful. Not just functionally, but symbolically. The dodecahedron is one of the 5 Platonic solids, the perfect 3-dimensional forms that have fascinated mathematicians and philosophers since ancient Greece. Plato himself associated the dodecahedron with the cosmos, with the divine structure of reality. What if the way 3i Atlas revealed itself was deliberate communication, not a message in words, but a message in form, a demonstration that says, we understand mathematics, we understand geometry, we understand the deep structure of reality that transcends language and culture. If that's true, then the opening of the shell was first contact, and we're still trying to understand what was said. The latest data from the space telescopes shows something new. The central hub, the core of 3i Atlas that remains after the swarm dispersed, is changing. It's expanding. Not physically growing, but unfolding. New structures are emerging, assembling themselves from materials that were compressed in the core. It's building something, we don't know what. A communications array, a processing center, a gateway. I keep returning to that dream, to the voice that said the chrysalis is opening. Because that's what this feels like. Not an invasion, not a visit, but an emergence. Something that was dormant is becoming active. Something that was traveling is arriving. Something that was waiting is beginning. The question that haunts me, that wakes me at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, is this: beginning what? I've spent my career studying the universe through equations, through mathematical models that strip away the messiness of reality and reveal the elegant laws underneath. MC2, the Schrödinger equation, Einstein's field equations, beautiful mathematics that describes everything from the orbit of planets to the decay of atoms. But there's no equation for this. No formula that tells you how to react when you discover that the cosmic ocean you've been studying your entire life is filled with swimmers, and they've just noticed you splashing around in the shallows. Maybe that's the real revelation here. Not that we're not alone, we've suspected that for decades, but that we're not ready, that for all our technology, all our science, all our philosophical sophistication, we're still children playing with fire, and the adults have finally shown up. I want to be optimistic. I want to believe that 3i Atlas represents contact with a benevolent elder civilization that will guide us toward a better future, that they'll share their technology, their wisdom, help us solve climate change and poverty and disease, that this is the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, not the final page. But I also know the universe doesn't care about what we want. It operates according to laws that have no preference for human survival or human happiness. And if there's one thing physics has taught me, it's that the universe is not obligated to make sense to you. Follow this channel as we continue to decode what may be the universe's final message to humanity, or its first invitation. I'll be watching the data, tracking every movement of the swarm, analyzing every signal, looking for patterns, for intent, for some way to understand what's happening above our heads right now, while most of humanity goes about their daily lives, unaware that the cosmos has fundamentally changed. But I need you to watch too. Look up at the night sky. Notice if anything seems different. A star that moves when stars shouldn't move, a flash of light where no satellite should be, a feeling in your bones that something has shifted in the fabric of reality itself. And tell me, if we're not alone, if we've never been alone, if the universe is crowded with civilizations watching and waiting and judging, what does that mean for the future of humanity? Are we being welcomed or are we being weighed?